The Greco-Roman gods, Jupiter or Zeus, Minerva or Athena, Cupid or Eros. That's how these names are pronounced in English, but what is the original pronunciation of the ancient Roman and Greek gods? Let's find out today. I'm Luke, and this is Polymathy. In this video, we're going to talk about the 12 Olympians, the gods and goddesses that live on Mount Olympus according to mythology. And let's start with the king of the gods. In Roman mythology, that's Jupiter, right? Well, what is it in Latin? Well, it's Jupiter. Jupiter, spelled the way that we spell it in English, also exists. In fact, that one almost seems a little bit more original because the first part, the is the sky, as I talked about in the Zeta video. This is Diu Pater, Jupiter, the father of the sky father. Jupiter or Jupiter in classical Latin pronunciation, and the same pronunciation in ecclesiastical Latin. What about the ancient Greek word? Well, the ancient Greek word in classical Attic pronunciation is Zeus, and believe it or not, they have the exact same etymology. The U over in the Latin and the Zeus, that is from the Proto-Indo-European word for sky. And it also gives us another Latin word, Deus. Isn't that crazy? So Deus, Zeus, and you in Jupiter or Jupiter, all the same origin, meaning sky. So Zeus, by Roman times, the Greek pronunciation had shifted and it was simply Zeus. In modern Greek pronunciation, though, it's Zeus. But it's a very weird word because look at this declension. Zeus, Dios, Dii, Dia. Os Deu. That's the name of Zeus in all the different cases. And it's easier to see with the Dios how close it is to Deus. And his beloved sister wife was, of course, Juno, the English pronunciation of that Roman goddess. Juno in Latin. If you guess that the first part in that Juno is the same as the Jupiter or Jupiter, you're right, also relating to the sky, and that no part probably derived from a root in Proto-Indo-European that means authority. Sky authority, maybe related to another Greek goddess named Dione. But Juno's counterpart is not Dione, but Hera. Hera, that's how her name is pronounced in classical Attic pronunciation. Hera, Ira in modern Greek pronunciation. Could it be from the word heros, hero? Could it be from hora, hour? Nobody really knows. Or could it be of pre-Greek origin like so many other theonyms? It's possible. By the way, that word theos in modern Greek pronunciation, meaning God, is coincidentally similar to the word deus, the Latin word for God. Like we mentioned, Deus is related to the U in Jupiter and to the Zeus, the word for Zeus, but not to Theos. That is a completely different etymology. Now, there are 12 Olympians, but which gods and goddesses are actually part of the 12 Olympians differs from author to author in antiquity. For example, while most of the spots are certain, one spot belongs to this one goddess or god, that is, to Vesta or Dionysus. So what are these names? Let's start with Vesta. So Vesta in Latin, Vesta. That's easy to pronounce. Vesta, which has the same etymology as its Greek equivalent, which is Hestia. In classical Attic pronunciation, that's Hestia. That name, Vesta, has been connected to a Proto-Indo-European root that means to dwell or to reside, and is the origin of a Proto-Germanic word which gives us the modern German word sein, to be. Hestia, meanwhile, in ancient Greek and classical Greek, it means the hearth. Thus, Hestia is literally the goddess of the hearth, of the home. Some debate the etymological connection between Hestia and Vesta, but I think it's pretty good. But like I said, there's competition for this particular spot. It's either Hestia or it's Dionysus. That's his name in the classical Attic pronunciation. Dionysus. We call him Dionysus. In Latin, his name is Dionysus. What changed? Well, Latin doesn't have pitch accent, like ancient Greek. It has instead stress accent. And of course, Latin uses us as its nominative singular ending instead of us as in ancient Greek. The competition for this 12th spot among the Olympians kind of makes sense because note how this name, Dionysus, there's no Latin equivalent. They just borrowed the name and Latinized it Dionysus. This god seems to have come later to the classical Greek pantheon and thus was adopted into the Roman pantheon after the fusion of ancient Greek and Roman cultures. Dionysus was the god of wine and drink and song, also known as Bacchus or Bacchus in Latin, Bacchus. According to myth, he could intoxicate his followers, who were often a bunch of women who would follow him around just absolutely crazed and then proceed to tear men apart. It's amazing what Dionysus was capable of. In fact, a whole mystery cult evolved around him that was a religion that almost any ancient Greek could partake in, the Dionysian mysteries. And in fact, these secret rites may be what is depicted in the Villa dei Misteri, the Villa of Mysteries in Pompeii, and they were thought to be so strange that they had to be outlawed. And in my story on StoryLearning, they actually have an impact all the way to the present day. In my StoryLearning course, not only do you learn Latin, but you learn how an intrepid group of 3 scholars and close friends discover a secret so shocking you're going to have to read it to believe it. And in my StoryLearning course, you get one of the most complete Latin pronunciation guides ever put together, and I did it for you. Just sign up at StoryLearning, and you get to learn the phonology in a way like I've never described before. The best way to learn a language is with a story, and this story will keep you gripped. It'll keep you on the edge of your seat. You're going to want to learn the language just so you find out what happens next. And along the way, I teach about the grammar, the vocabulary, everything you need to know to begin to acquire Latin. So if you want to finally start to learn Latin or improve your beginner Latin, then sign up today. There is a Black Friday sale for a limited time, and you're going to want to know how Dionysus fits into this incredible and bizarre story while you read an actual novella written in Latin for you to teach you Latin. And speaking of Dionysus, how do we say his name in the ecclesiastical Latin pronunciation? Whereas it's Dionysus in classical Latin, it's simply Dionysus in ecclesiastical Latin pronunciation. Dionysus. And it's Dionysos in classical Attic pronunciation, but Dionysos in modern Greek pronunciation. Another of the Olympian gods is Neptune, or Poseidon. So in Latin, Neptune is Neptunus. The etymology of this word isn't certain, as it is with many of the gods, but it may be related to the word nebula in Latin, etymologically connected to the ancient Greek word nepos, meaning the mist, the fog, so something moist and damp, which makes sense that a god of the sea would be, a little damp. The Greek equivalent of Neptune is Poseidon, and Poseidon in classical Attic pronunciation is Poseidon, or in modern Greek pronunciation, Poseidon. The etymology of this name is quite uncertain. One hypothesis I like is the combination of the word posis, meaning master or husband, combined with the root that's also in Demeter, whom we're going to see soon, which is de, related to the word ge, meaning the earth. So something like master of the earth, husband of the earth, something like that is possibly the etymology of this name, though we're not sure. However, since Poseidon is the god of earthquakes, it could in fact make sense. Earthquakes, of course, were associated with seismic waves and everything, so there's a connection there between the sea and seismic activity. And I think it's time I taught you how to swear in ancient Greek. That's right, I'm going to tell you how to swear by Poseidon. Ne Poseido. This is na, which is a contraction of nai. It is essentially the way to say yeah. Nai means yes. Na means yeah, more or less. So na plus the accusative of whatever god you want to swear by or goddess. Ne Poseido. Men tend to swear by the male gods, and women tend to swear by the female goddesses in ancient Greek. Or depending on whichever god or goddess you wanted to invoke for whatever purpose or situation you want to swear about. So ne Poseido, by Poseidon. We can also swear by Zeus, na dia. And since na means yeah, this is like a stronger way of saying yeah, na dia. You betcha. Darn right. You're darn right. Like that, we use a swear, the darn or damn, if you want to be a little bit more profane, to emphasize the yes or yeah or the affirmation. Na dia, ne Poseido. And sometimes we put the article, the word for the, ne ton Poseido, ne ton dia. And we can also swear by Demeter. Let's start with the swear. Ne ten Demeter. Yeah, by Demeter. And what's the etymology of this name? Well, like we mentioned before, the da part is probably from an earlier da, related to an early ga, which becomes ge in classical Attic. And that means the earth, like Gaia, right? Ge, geologia, geology. And the mater part is mother, da mater, earth mother. That sure does make a lot of sense. Ne ten Demeter. Da mater, that's the classical Attic pronunciation. In modern Greek pronunciation, it's Demeter. Does she have an ancient Roman equivalent? Ne ten Demeter. And it is Ceres. Ceres, which happens to be one of my favorite planets in the whole solar system. It's in the asteroid belt, very small. Ceres is the classical Latin pronunciation, or Ceres in the ecclesiastical pronunciation. Ceres is connected to the Latin word crescere, to grow. In Italian, that's crescere, which we have in English as a crescent or growing moon. Ceres gives us the word cereal, since Ceres was the goddess of the harvest of all the food that's planted and harvested. Thus, cereals are the food named after her. Another of the Olympian goddesses, perhaps the most famous, is Venus in Latin, Venus in English. Venus in ecclesiastical pronunciation is Venus. Venus in Latin literally means loveliness. Thus, Venus, the goddess, Venus, is the embodiment of loveliness itself. And she's called Venus, of course, in the ecclesiastical pronunciation. Her ancient Greek counterpart is Aphrodite in the classical Attic pronunciation, or Aphrodite in the modern Greek pronunciation. We call her Aphrodite in English. This name is very interesting. There isn't any one consensus on the etymology. The traditional view is that the first part of the word is apros, which means sea foam, and then the rest is just some sort of suffix. That would connect to the mythological origin of the goddess herself, how she was born out of the sea foam. But that, along with other hypotheses, are rejected by modern scholars. Maybe we'll never know. But another ancient Greek goddess that starts with the letter A, or alpha, that's Athena, or Athene. Athena, we call her in English. In modern Greek pronunciation, we would call the one version Athena and the other Athene. Athena was more typical of the prose in classical Attic, and Athene was a bit more typical in Homeric Greek, in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Let's talk about the Latin equivalent, which is Minerva. Minerva. Now, this Minerva name is almost certainly from Etruscan and then borrowed into Latin. And Etruscan's not a Proto-Indo-European language. However, Etruscan seems to have borrowed it from some Italic root, because the first part of this is almost certainly of Proto-Indo-European origin. And that first part, the mens, meaning mind, the same word that gives us mania, mainomai, I'm going crazy, and maninae detea, the wrath of Achilles, right? So why is Minerva about the mind? Because she's the goddess of wisdom, right? The etymology, meanwhile, of Athene, or Athena, is uncertain. Another of the Olympian goddesses is Diana.
Diana.
You're right, Counselor Troy. In fact, in Latin, it's pronounced Diana or Diana. This goddess's name comes from the same origin as that of Jupiter and Zeus, the word for Deus, and also, incidentally, the word for dies, the day, the sunny sky part, right? Yeah. So that origin is Deus, which is the divine thing. It's the same origin as the word Deus. Deus is just more contracted form of Deus, divine. So Diana, that's why the initial I is long, which is shortened ad libidum in the ancient authors. Diana or Diana. The ancient Greek goddess equivalent of Diana is Artemis. The etymology of the name of the huntress is not certain. According to mythology, Artemis's twin brother was Apollon, Apollo. This is one that the Romans didn't have a special name for, that they clearly imported directly from the Greek culture. And so the name Apollon from ancient Greek is just Apollo in Latin. They cut off the final end. They didn't need it. They got rid of it. So Apollon, how do we say this with a modern Greek pronunciation? Well, just take away the geminate sound of the lambda and you get Apollon. And there you go.
There you go.
The etymology of Apollo is also uncertain, but it's often associated with the verb apollumi, which means I destroy. That is, however, almost certainly a folk etymology, brought to you by Plato in Cratylus. All right, now we got to the good one, the origin of the name of my other channel, which is Scorpio Martianus, right? And that's Mars. Mars. Why is it a long A? Well, that's because it's a contraction of Mawars. His Greek equivalent is Ares. That's the classical Attic pronunciation of Ares, or in modern Greek pronunciation, Ares. We're not sure where this word comes from. It may come from the word are, meaning bane or ruin. And thus we go from real planets to fictional ones, like the planet Vulcan, which is named after a hypothesized planet that should have been found between Mercury and the Sun, but was found not to be necessary thanks to general relativity. That's right, Albert Einstein proved no need for there to be a planet Vulcan, which is a whole story in of itself. Remind me to tell you about this story. It's very interesting. Let me know in the comments if you want to hear about the planet, space exploration, and all the fun etymological and mythological connections therein. In Latin, Vulcan's name is Vulcanus. Believe it or not, our word volcano comes from this, but not like you'd expect. It comes from the Italian word vulcano, the god himself, because the god himself, of course, vulcano, giving us volcano. Vulcanus in ecclesiastical pronunciation, you guessed it, just vulcanus. That's easy. Not so easy, perhaps, is the equivalent in the ancient Greek pantheon, whom we call Hephaestus in English and is Hephaestus in classical Attic pronunciation, or Hephaestus in the modern Greek pronunciation. We have no idea what the etymology is of this word. Also a Vulcan, we think it's from Etruscan. And the Etruscan may have borrowed it from Doric Greek, Vulcanos. I'll have to look into that a bit more because it seems kind of crazy. One more Olympian god for you, and that is the messenger himself, Mercury, Mercurius in Latin. And in classical Attic, his name is Hermes, or Hermes in the modern Greek pronunciation. We don't know where Hermes came from exactly. There's some hypotheses, but I won't go into them today. Mercurius, meanwhile, may be related to the Latin word merx, merces, which are merchandise. Or it may come from an Etruscan root and was then mixed together with merx, because of course Mercury was the god of merchandise, of the sending of things, including people, cargo, the dead to the underworld, all kinds of things. So that covers all 13 of the 12 Olympians. 13, like I said before, because there's some debate over who should have the position number 12. Should it be Hestia or Dionysus? Probably the older one is almost certainly Hestia, but Dionysus, he just butts his way in there. So that's Dionysus for you. But I have a few more bonus ones for you. For example, there is that triad, that trinity, if you will, of the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Hades, so let's talk about him. He doesn't sit on Olympus because he rules the underworld. So while in modern Greek pronunciation, this god's name is Hades, in classical Attic pronunciation, it's Hades. But by Roman times, the pronunciation shifted a bit and it becomes simply Hades. But there's another name given to the god of the underworld, and that's Pluton. This is from the ancient Greek word Plutos, meaning wealth or riches. And why would wealth be associated with the god of death? Well, because he's the god of the underworld, and under the ground is where all the minerals are, like gold and silver and tin and copper and all those important things, all those things that make people wealthy in Bronze Age and classical times. Hence, Pluton. Pluto, that's Pluto in Latin, the Latinization of Pluton, that just cut off the end like Apollon, Apollo. The ancient Roman equivalent of Hades or Pluto is Dis, which is from the word divis, meaning wealthy. It all fits together. One more bonus for you. The god Cupid is from the Latin word cupido, which means desire, connected to the Latin verb cupio, cupere, which means to desire. Instead of cupido, he's sometimes called amor, love itself, just as Venus is loveliness herself. Amor, or cupido, is love or desire himself. And the translation of those words, cupido and amor, into ancient Greek, perhaps vice versa if you will, is Eros, Eros. Well, I hope you just loved this deep dive into the pronunciation of ancient Greek and Roman gods and goddesses' names. If you like this, let me know in the description and I'll do more of them. Remember to sign up at the link in the description for the StoryLearning course. Thanks to each and every one of my Patreon supporters, most of all, and to each and every one of you for watching this. Walete kai hygienete.